The afternoon sun blazed mercilessly over the dusty streets of Copper Ridge, Arizona, a small mining town nestled between red rock canyons and endless desert. The Lucky Strike Saloon stood as the heart of the community, its wooden doors swinging open to miners, ranchers, and drifters seeking refuge from the scorching heat. Inside, the air was thick with cigar smoke and the sound of clinking glasses, while a weathered piano played a melancholy tune in the corner. Behind the bar, Samuel Sam McGrath wiped down glasses with a stained rag, his eyes scanning the usual crowd. Cowboys leaned against the counter nursing their whiskey. Card players argued over hands of poker. And in the back corner, the saloon girls laughed with their patrons. But Sam's attention was drawn to the figure who had just burst through the doors, a man who looked completely out of place in this rough frontier establishment. The stranger was clearly a farmer, his clothes covered in dried mud and dust from the fields. His face was sunburned and lined with deep worry, his hands calloused from years of working the unforgiving Arizona soil. He stumbled to the bar, his breathing heavy and desperate, and began speaking in a language Sam had never heard before. The words tumbled out rapidly, filled with obvious distress, but they were completely incomprehensible to everyone in the saloon. The farmer's eyes darted around the room, searching for understanding, for anyone who could help him. He repeated his words louder now, his voice cracking with emotion. The saloon fell silent as patrons turned to stare at this unusual spectacle. Some laughed, others shook their heads in confusion, and a few simply returned to their drinks, dismissing the man as either drunk or mad. Sam tried to calm him down, speaking slowly in English, but the farmer only grew more agitated, grabbing Sam's shirt and continuing his frantic speech. From the back of the saloon, a figure emerged from the shadows. She moved with a grace that seemed to part the crowd like water. Her name was Elena Moreau, and she was the saloon's most captivating dancer. Her dark hair was pinned up with silver combs, and her emerald dress shimmered even in the dim lamplight. But what made Elena truly remarkable was something no one in Copper Ridge fully understood. She had traveled the world before arriving in this dusty Arizona town, and in her travels, she had collected languages like precious gems. Elena approached the desperate farmer, her expression shifting from curiosity to deep concentration as she listened to his words. Then something extraordinary happened. She began to speak back to him in his own language, her voice soft but clear. The farmer's eyes widened with relief and hope, tears streaming down his weathered face as he finally found someone who understood. The entire saloon watched in stunned silence as Elena and the farmer engaged in a rapid conversation, her face growing more serious with each passing moment. When she finally turned to address the crowd, her voice was steady but urgent, and what she was about to reveal would change everything for the people of Copper Ridge. Elena's eyes swept across the silent saloon, as every patron waited to hear what the desperate farmer had been trying to communicate. She took a deep breath, her hand still resting gently on the farmer's shoulder to steady him. "His name is Andrei Volkov," she began, her English carrying a slight accent that hinted at her own complex past. "He's a Russian immigrant who settled in the valley east of here with his family 3 years ago. He doesn't speak English, only Russian, and he's been trying to tell everyone that his daughter is missing." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Sam leaned forward over the bar, his expression shifting from confusion to concern. "Missing? For how long?" Elena turned back to Andrei, speaking to him again in Russian. His response was quick and filled with anguish. "Since yesterday morning," Elena translated. "She went to check their irrigation ditches near the canyon ridge and never returned. He searched everywhere he knows, but the land is vast and he doesn't know the territory well enough. He's afraid she's hurt, lost, or worse." The mood in the saloon changed instantly. Whatever amusement or indifference the patrons had felt moments ago evaporated, replaced by a collective sense of urgency. In frontier communities like Copper Ridge, survival depended on neighbors helping neighbors, regardless of where they came from or what language they spoke. Several men stood up from their tables, already reaching for their hats. "How old is the girl?" asked a grizzled prospector named Dutch, his voice gruff but concerned. Elena asked Andrei, then replied, 12 years old. Her name is Katya. She has blonde hair, usually braided, and she was wearing a blue cotton dress." She paused, listening to Andrei add more details. "He says she's responsible and knows not to wander too far, which is why he's so worried." "This isn't like her." Sam called out to the room. "All right, we need to organize a search party. Who's willing to ride out?" Hands shot up around the saloon, miners and cowboys alike volunteering without hesitation. As plans began to form, Elena continued to serve as the vital bridge between Andre and the townspeople. She translated his descriptions of the land, the last place he saw Katya, and the routes he'd already searched. Her ability to speak Russian transformed her from a saloon dancer into something far more valuable, a connector of worlds, a voice for the voiceless. The respect in the room shifted palpably as men who had once seen her merely as entertainment now looked at her with genuine admiration. But as Elena spoke with Andre, she noticed something else in his words. A hesitation, a fear he wasn't fully expressing. She pressed him gently in Russian, and his response made her face darken. She turned to the assembled group, her voice lower now. "There's something else," she said carefully. "Andre says that 2 days ago, he saw tracks near his property, horse tracks that didn't belong to any of his neighbors. He didn't think much of it at the time, but now he's wondering if someone might have taken Katya deliberately." The saloon erupted in angry voices. The idea that someone might have kidnapped a child sent rage through the crowd. Dutch slammed his fist on the table. "If someone's taken that girl, we'll find them and make them regret it." Sam held up his hands, trying to restore order. "Let's not jump to conclusions. First we search. We bring Katya home safe. Elena, you'll need to come with us to help translate if we find anything." Elena nodded without hesitation, already untying her apron. As the search party prepared to depart, Elena found herself in an unexpected position of leadership. Men who had never taken orders from a woman, let alone a saloon dancer, now waited for her instructions and translations. She helped Andre describe the terrain, the irrigation system, and the specific canyon area where Katya had disappeared. Maps were spread across the bar, routes were planned, and supplies were gathered. The Lucky Strike Saloon had transformed from a place of leisure into a command center, all because one woman could speak a language no one else in town understood. Just as the group was about to mount their horses, a well-dressed man entered the saloon, his polished boots clicking against the wooden floor. He was Harrison Blackwood, owner of the largest ranch in the territory and a man whose word carried significant weight in Copper Ridge. He surveyed the scene with sharp, calculating eyes. "I heard there's a search party forming," he said coolly. "What's all this commotion about?" Elena felt a strange chill as she looked at him. Something in his demeanor felt wrong, but she pushed the feeling aside and explained the situation. Blackwood's expression remained neutral as he listened, and when she finished, he said something that made everyone pause. "I'll offer a reward, $100 to whoever finds the girl, and I'll contribute men and horses to the search." It seemed generous, but Elena couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that settled in her chest as Blackwood's cold eyes lingered just a moment too long on her face. Dawn broke over the Arizona desert in streaks of pink and gold, painting the rocky canyons with warm light. The search party had split into 3 groups, each taking different sections of the vast territory east of Copper Ridge. Elena rode alongside Andre, serving as his voice and his hope, while Sam and Dutch led the other groups. The landscape was unforgiving, filled with deep ravines, scattered Joshua trees, and red rock formations that seemed to stretch endlessly under the cloudless sky. As they rode, Elena learned more about Andre's story through their conversations. He had fled Russia with his wife and daughter, seeking a new life away from the hardships of the old country. They had saved every penny to buy a small parcel of land in Arizona, drawn by promises of opportunity and freedom. But the reality had been harsher than expected. The soil was difficult, water was scarce, and the isolation was profound. His wife had passed away from illness the previous winter, leaving just him and Katya to work the land together. The girl was all he had left in the world, his reason for enduring the brutal work and loneliness. Elena felt her heart ache for the man beside her. She understood the immigrant experience, the feeling of being caught between 2 worlds, of struggling to communicate and belong. Her own past was complicated. The daughter of a French diplomat and a Spanish mother, she had grown up moving from country to country, collecting languages naturally as other children collected toys. English, Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, German, Arabic, Russian, and Mandarin. Each language had opened a new door in her life. But circumstances had led her to Copper Ridge, and while she had found work at the Lucky Strike, she often felt her abilities were wasted in a place where most people spoke only English. As the sun climbed higher, the heat became oppressive. The search party moved methodically through the terrain, calling Katya's name and checking every canyon and rock formation. Andrei's face was etched with exhaustion and worry, but he refused to stop or rest. Elena stayed close to him, offering water and encouragement, translating his questions to the other searchers. Hours passed with no sign of the girl, and desperation began to creep into everyone's movements. It was nearly noon when Elena's group came upon something unusual. Near the edge of a deep canyon, half hidden by scrub brush, they found a piece of torn blue fabric caught on a thorny branch. Andrei let out a cry of recognition. It was from Katya's dress. Elena immediately examined the ground around the area, and what she found made her blood run cold. There were clear signs of a struggle, small footprints in the dust, larger boot prints and drag marks leading toward the canyon edge, but the trail didn't go over the cliff. Instead, it curved along the ridge, heading toward a narrow path that descended into the canyon system. Elena called out to Sam's group using a signal whistle they had agreed upon. Within minutes, the other searchers converged on their location. As they examined the evidence, Dutch pointed out something else. Fresh horse tracks, at least 2 horses, maybe 3, and they were heading deeper into the canyon maze. "Someone took her," Dutch growled, his weathered face hardening with anger. "And recently, too. These tracks aren't more than a day old." Andrei didn't need a translation to understand. His face went pale and he started to dismount, ready to run down the canyon path on foot if necessary. Elena grabbed his arm, speaking firmly in Russian. "We need to be smart about this, Andrei. If someone has Katya, rushing in could put her in more danger. We need to track carefully and plan our approach." She turned to the men and translated the situation. Sam nodded gravely, already thinking tactically. The canyon system is like a maze down there. Easy to get lost, easier to hide. If whoever took her is still down there, they have the advantage of knowing their position. We need to split up again. One group tracks from above along the ridge, one follows the path down, and one circles around to cut off any escape routes. As they organized, Elena noticed something that had been bothering her since they found the tracks. She knelt down and studied the boot prints more carefully. They were distinct, expensive boots, not the worn work boots of a common drifter or outlaw. These were the kind of boots worn by someone with money. She stood up slowly, a thought forming in her mind that she didn't want to believe. The image of Harrison Blackwood from the previous night flashed through her memory. His cold eyes, his too generous offer, his strange demeanor. Could it be possible? Before she could voice her suspicion, one of the younger ranch hands from Blackwood's property rode up to join them. He was out of breath, his horse lathered with sweat. "Mr. Blackwood sent me to assist with the search," he announced. "He wants to know if there's been any progress." The timing of his arrival, just as they found real evidence, struck Elena as oddly convenient. She exchanged a glance with Sam, and she could see he was thinking the same thing. "Tell Mr. Blackwood we found tracks," Sam said carefully. "We're following them now into the canyon system." No sign of the girl yet. The ranch hand nodded and turned his horse to leave, but Elena stopped him with a question, spoken first in English, then curiously in Spanish. "¿Hace cuánto tiempo trabajas para el señor Blackwood?" The young man looked surprised but answered in Spanish, clearly more comfortable in his native language. He explained he had been working at the ranch for 3 months, that Blackwood had many workers, some who came and went without much explanation. Elena pressed further, asking if he had noticed anything unusual recently. The young man hesitated, glancing around nervously, then admitted in a low voice that 2 of Blackwood's men had left 2 days ago with supplies and hadn't returned. Blackwood had claimed they were checking fence lines in the far pastures. Elena's suspicion crystallized into certainty. She thanked the ranch hand in Spanish and turned to Sam as the young man rode away. "I think Harrison Blackwood is involved in this," she said quietly, explaining what she had just learned. Those tracks, the timing, the expensive boots, and now men missing from his ranch at exactly the time Katya disappeared. "It's too much coincidence." Sam's jaw tightened. But why? Why would the richest man in the territory kidnap a poor farmer's daughter? What could he possibly gain? Elena shook her head, troubled. "I don't know yet, but I think we need to find Katya first, then get answers. If I'm right and Blackwood's men have her, we need to be very careful. He has power, influence, and resources that could make this dangerous for all of us." The search party descended into the canyon, following the trail that wound through narrow passages and past ancient rock walls carved by centuries of flash floods. The temperature dropped in the shade. but the tension rose with every step. Andre stayed close to Elena, his hands trembling as he gripped his horse's reins. Elena found herself in a position she never expected, not just as a translator but as an investigator, a protector, and possibly the only person who could unravel whatever dark scheme was unfolding. As they rounded a bend in the canyon, they heard something that made everyone freeze, the distant sound of a young girl crying, and it was coming from somewhere deep within the maze of red rock walls ahead. The sound of crying led them through a series of winding passages until the canyon opened into a small hidden valley, sheltered on all sides by towering red rock walls. There, tucked against the cliff face, was a makeshift camp with 2 horses tethered nearby, and a small fire smoldering in a ring of stones. 2 men sat near the fire, rough-looking individuals with guns on their hips, and behind them, huddled against the rocks with her hands bound, was Katya. The girl's face was streaked with tears and dust, her blonde braids disheveled, and her blue dress torn at the hem. When she saw her father approaching with the search party, her eyes widened with hope and fear. She tried to cry out, but one of the men quickly moved to silence her. The other man stood up, his hand moving toward his weapon, but he froze when he saw the number of armed men surrounding their position. They were outnumbered and trapped with no way to escape. Sam stepped forward, his voice steady but firm. "Let the girl go. There's no way out of this for you. Don't make it worse." The taller of the 2 men, a scarred individual with cold eyes, spat on the ground. "We're just following orders. You want to blame someone? Go talk to the man who paid us." His companion, a younger fellow with nervous energy, looked ready to bolt despite the impossibility of escape. "We didn't hurt her," he blurted out. "We were just supposed to hold her for a few days, that's all. We were told it was about a land dispute, nothing serious." Elena's mind raced as she processed this confirmation of her suspicions. She turned to Andre and quickly translated what was being said. His face transformed from relief at seeing his daughter to rage at understanding she had been deliberately taken. Before anyone could stop him, Andre rushed forward with a roar of anger. Sam and Dutch caught him, holding him back as he shouted in Russian at the captors who couldn't understand a word. Elena hurried to Katya, speaking to her softly in Russian, cutting the ropes around the girl's wrists with a knife from her belt. Katya collapsed into Elena's arms, sobbing and trembling. Elena held her close, speaking soothing words in the girl's native language, promising she was safe now. She asked Katya gently if the men had harmed her, and the girl shook her head, explaining through tears that they had grabbed her while she was alone by the irrigation ditch, covered her mouth, and brought her to this canyon. They had given her food and water but kept her tied up and threatened her to stay quiet. Elena's heart ached for the child's terror, but she was relieved Katya was physically unharmed. As Katya reunited with her father, the 2 men were bound and secured by the search party. Sam approached the taller man, his voice hard. "You said someone paid you. Who?" "We need a name." The man laughed bitterly. "You already know who. Everyone in this territory knows who has that kind of money and power. Harrison Blackwood. He paid us $50 each to take the girl and keep her here for a week. Said after that, we could let her go in the desert and claim we found her wandering. He needed the father desperate and distracted." Dutch grabbed the man by his collar. "Why? What's Blackwood's angle in this?" The younger captor, eager to save his own skin, spoke up quickly. "It's about the land. The Russians' property sits right on top of the best water source in the Eastern Valley. Blackwood's been trying to buy it for months, but the farmer kept refusing. Blackwood figured if the girl went missing, the father would be so broken and desperate he'd sell cheap and leave the territory. Then Blackwood would control all the water rights from here to the foothills. He could charge every farmer and rancher whatever he wanted." The revelation hung in the air like a thunderclap. The entire kidnapping had been a calculated business move, a cruel manipulation designed to break a grieving father who had already lost his wife, simply to control water rights. Elena felt her stomach turn at the cold heartlessness of it. She looked at Andre, who was holding Katya tightly, and she knew he understood enough from the context and the reactions around him to grasp what had happened. The other men in the search party were equally outraged, their faces dark with anger. "We need to get back to town," Sam said decisively. "We're bringing these 2 in, and we're going to have a serious conversation with Harrison Blackwood. This ends today." As they prepared to leave the canyon, Elena helped Katya onto a horse, staying close to offer comfort. The girl was exhausted but safe, and that was what mattered most. Andre kept touching his daughter's hand as if assuring himself she was real, and Elena translated his grateful words to the men who had helped find her. As they made their way out of the canyon maze, Elena rode beside Sam. "Blackwood is powerful," she said quietly. "He owns half the businesses in Copper Ridge, and he has connections with the territorial authorities. Bringing him to justice won't be easy, especially with just the word of 2 hired thugs." Sam nodded grimly. "I know, but we can't let him get away with this. If he did this to Andre, he'll do it to others. We need evidence, testimony, and we need enough people willing to stand up to him." Elena thought about her unique position in this situation. Her ability to speak Russian had started this entire chain of events. Without her translation, Andre would never have been able to communicate his daughter's disappearance, and Katya might have been lost forever. But now Elena found herself thinking beyond just translation. She had spent years moving through different societies, observing how power worked, how languages could be barriers or bridges. She had connections in town that others didn't. People who had confided in her precisely because she was seen as just a saloon dancer, beneath notice but present everywhere. "I might be able to help," Elena said thoughtfully. "There are people in town who talk to me, who trust me with information they wouldn't share with others. Blackwood's ranch hands, some of his business partners, even some of his household staff. If we can get them to speak up, to confirm what we suspect about his other dealings, we might have enough to force the territorial authorities to act. But we need to be smart about it. Blackwood can't know we're building a case until we're ready." Sam looked at her with new respect. "You're more than just a translator, aren't you?" Elena smiled sadly. "I've always been more than what people see. They just never asked." When they finally emerged from the canyon system and back into the open desert, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. The town of Copper Ridge was visible in the distance, its buildings silhouetted against the orange sky. As they rode toward it, Elena realized that everything was about to change. The quiet saloon dancer who had been content to remain in the background was about to step into the light, and Harrison Blackwood's reign over the territory was about to face its first real challenge. The question was whether the truth would be enough to overcome money and power, and whether a community that had barely noticed her before would trust her to lead them through what came next. The return to Copper Ridge created an immediate stir. Word spread quickly through the dusty streets that Katya had been found, and that Harrison Blackwood was implicated in her kidnapping. By the time the search party reached the center of town, a crowd had already gathered outside the sheriff's office. People whispered in shock and anger, struggling to believe that the town's most prominent citizen could be capable of such cruelty. Sheriff Tom Brennan, a weathered lawman who had served the territory for 20 years, stood on the wooden steps of his office as the party arrived. His face was grave as Sam and Dutch presented the 2 captured men and explained what they had discovered. Andre, still holding Katya close, watched anxiously as Elena translated the proceedings for him. The crowd grew larger, miners and shop owners and ranch hands all pressing in to hear what had happened. "These are serious accusations," Sheriff Brennan said carefully, his eyes moving from the prisoners to the crowd. "Harrison Blackwood is a respected member of this community. We'll need more than the word of hired criminals before we can move against him." The taller prisoner laughed bitterly. "Respected? He's a snake who uses his money to crush anyone in his way. You think this is the first time he's pulled something like this? Ask around, Sheriff. Ask how many small landowners mysteriously decided to sell their property cheap right after some tragedy befell them." Elena stepped forward, and the crowd seemed to notice her properly for the first time. In her dusty riding clothes, with her hair wind-blown and her face marked by the day's hard journey, she looked nothing like the elegant saloon dancer they were accustomed to seeing. "Sheriff Brennan," she said clearly, her voice carrying authority that surprised even herself, "I believe there are others in this town who can corroborate a pattern of behavior. People who have been afraid to speak up because of Blackwood's power. But if we stand together, if we give them the courage to come forward, we can prove this wasn't an isolated incident." The sheriff studied her for a long moment. "Miss Moreau, with all due respect, gathering testimony against a man like Blackwood will be dangerous. He has lawyers, influence, and resources. Even if we collect statements, he could claim their lies from disgruntled workers or competitors." Elena nodded. "I understand. But I'm not just anyone asking these questions, Sheriff. I speak 9 languages. There are people in this territory, Immigrants, workers, traveling merchants who have witnessed things but couldn't report them because of language barriers. Just like André couldn't report his daughter missing until I translated, how many other injustices have gone unreported simply because no one could communicate across those barriers? A murmur of recognition went through the crowd. People began to realize what Elena was suggesting. The territory was filled with diverse communities: Chinese railroad workers, Mexican ranch hands, German miners, Italian stonemasons, all people who might have information, but lacked the language skills to navigate the English-speaking legal system. Elena had just identified herself as the key to unlocking all those silent voices. "Give me 3 days," Elena said with quiet determination. "Let me talk to people in their own languages, in their own communities. Let me build a case that even Blackwood's lawyers can't dismiss. But I'll need protection. If Blackwood realizes what I'm doing, he'll try to stop me." Sheriff Brennan stroked his gray beard thoughtfully. "It's irregular, but I suppose we have no choice. Sam, Dutch, I want you two to stay with Miss Moreau as she conducts her investigation. If she can bring me solid evidence, I'll move against Blackwood, powerful or not." Over the next 3 days, Elena embarked on a mission unlike anything Copper Ridge had ever seen. She traveled to the Chinese encampment east of town, where she spoke Mandarin with the railroad workers. There, she learned of a foreman who had died in a suspicious accident after refusing to sell his small plot of land to Blackwood. She visited the Mexican families who worked on various ranches, speaking Spanish and hearing stories of intimidation and forced sales. A German mining family told her in their native language about how their equipment had been sabotaged after they declined Blackwood's offer to buy their claim. Elena documented everything meticulously, taking statements and finding witnesses who had been silent simply because they didn't know how to make themselves heard in English. She translated their accounts carefully, preserving the details while making them accessible to the sheriff. Sam and Dutch accompanied her everywhere, watching for any sign of Blackwood's men trying to interfere. The saloon dancer had transformed into something the town had never seen before: an advocate, an investigator, a voice for the voiceless. On the second day, Elena visited Blackwood's own ranch, speaking with his household staff. His Mexican housekeeper, Maria, had been afraid to speak out, but when Elena addressed her in perfect Spanish, the woman's defenses crumbled. She revealed that she had overheard Blackwood planning Katya's kidnapping, discussing it with his foreman in his study. She had been terrified to report it, fearing deportation or worse. Elena gently assured her that her testimony, combined with others, would protect her. Maria agreed to speak to the sheriff, and her account as someone within Blackwood's own household was devastating. By the third day, Elena had gathered testimony from 17 different witnesses, speaking 7 different languages. The pattern was unmistakable. Blackwood had been systematically using tragedy, intimidation, and manipulation to consolidate land and water rights throughout the territory. The kidnapping of Katya was just his most recent and most desperate move. When Elena presented the compiled evidence to Sheriff Brennan, even the skeptical lawman couldn't deny the weight of it. "This is extraordinary work, Miss Moreau," the sheriff said, reviewing the translated statements. "I've never seen anything like it. You've given voice to an entire community that's been suffering in silence." Elena felt a sense of purpose she had never experienced before. "Language should never be a barrier to justice, Sheriff. Every person deserves to be heard, regardless of what tongue they speak." Sheriff Brennan stood up, his decision made. "It's time to bring Harrison Blackwood in for questioning. With this evidence, I believe we can make charges stick, even with his lawyers and connections." That evening, as the sun set over Copper Ridge, Sheriff Brennan, accompanied by Sam, Dutch, and several deputized townsmen, rode out to the Blackwood Ranch. Elena waited in town with André and Katya, translating updates as they came in. The confrontation was tense, but Blackwood had no choice but to comply when faced with the mountain of evidence and the number of armed men at his door. He was brought to the sheriff's office in handcuffs, his face a mask of cold fury, his eyes seeking out Elena in the crowd that had gathered. "You've made a grave mistake," Blackwood said to Elena as he was led past her. "You think this changes anything? I'll be out by morning. My lawyers will tear apart every statement you collected. These people are foreigners, criminals, liars." Elena met his gaze steadily and replied in perfect, unaccented English. "These people are human beings who deserve to be heard, and now they have been. Your power was built on their silence, Mr. Blackwood." But silence can be broken, especially when someone speaks their language. As Blackwood was locked in a cell, Elena felt Andrei's hand on her shoulder. He spoke to her in Russian, his voice thick with emotion and gratitude. She didn't need to translate it for the crowd. Everyone could see in his face what he was saying, that Elena had not only saved his daughter but had given him and countless others hope, that justice was possible even for those who couldn't speak the dominant language. The town of Copper Ridge was changing, and Elena, the saloon dancer who spoke 9 languages, had become the unlikely catalyst for that change. The trial of Harrison Blackwood became the biggest event in Arizona Territory history. Lawyers arrived from as far as San Francisco, and journalists from eastern newspapers traveled to the small town of Copper Ridge to cover the unprecedented case. What made it truly remarkable wasn't just the fall of a powerful man, but the fact that the prosecution's case was built on testimony from 17 witnesses, speaking 7 different languages, all translated and presented by Elena Moreau. The courtroom was packed every day of the 2-week trial. Elena served as the official court translator, a role that had never existed in the territory before. She stood beside each witness, translating their words with precision and dignity, ensuring that every voice was heard clearly and accurately. The defense lawyers tried repeatedly to challenge the translations, but Elena's credentials spoke for themselves. She had documents proving her linguistic education in Europe, references from diplomats and scholars, and most importantly, the respect of every community she represented. Andrei's testimony, delivered in Russian and translated by Elena, was particularly powerful. He described his family's journey to America, the loss of his wife, and the terror of nearly losing his daughter. When he explained how he had felt utterly helpless in the saloon, unable to make anyone understand his desperate need for help, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. The moment Elena had spoken to him in his own language, he said, was the moment he felt human again, seen and heard in a foreign land. The evidence was overwhelming. The 2 hired kidnappers testified against Blackwood in exchange for reduced sentences. Maria, the housekeeper, bravely took the stand and recounted what she had overheard. One by one, the other witnesses Elena had found came forward, their stories painting a picture of a man who had ruthlessly exploited the vulnerable for years. The jury, composed of 12 men from various backgrounds in the territory, deliberated for only 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict on charges of kidnapping, conspiracy, and fraud. Harrison Blackwood was sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison. His vast holdings were seized to pay restitution to his victims, and the land he had accumulated through manipulation was returned to its rightful owners. Andrei received back full clear title to his property, along with compensation that would allow him to properly develop his farm and secure Katya's future. The water rights Blackwood had tried to monopolize were placed under community management, ensuring fair access for all the territory's farmers and ranchers. But the most lasting change came in how Copper Ridge viewed its immigrant communities. The trial had revealed how many people had been living and working among them in silence, unable to participate fully in society because of language barriers. The town council, inspired by Elena's work, established the territory's first multilingual services office. They hired translators for Spanish, Chinese, German, and Italian, the most common languages among the immigrant population. Elena was offered the position of director, with a salary that far exceeded what she had earned at the Lucky Strike Saloon. Elena accepted the role with a sense of profound purpose. She transformed a small office near the courthouse into a welcoming space where anyone, regardless of their native language, could seek help with legal matters, business documents, land claims, or any interaction with English-speaking authorities. She trained a small staff of multilingual assistants, many of them immigrants themselves who had been working in menial jobs despite their education and abilities. The office became a model for other territories, and within a year, similar services began appearing in communities throughout the Southwest. The Lucky Strike Saloon held a special evening in Elena's honor before she fully transitioned to her new role. Sam stood behind the bar and raised a glass to her, his voice carrying across the room. To Elena Moreau, who showed us that understanding each other is the first step to justice. Who taught us that everyone has value, everyone deserves to be heard, and sometimes the most important skill isn't the ability to speak, but the willingness to listen. The saloon erupted in cheers and applause. Andrei and Katya were there that evening too. Katya had been learning English quickly with Elena's help, but she still felt most comfortable speaking Russian. She presented Elena with a gift, a beautiful shawl that her mother had embroidered, one of the few precious items the family had brought from Russia. Through Elena's translation, Katya said, "You saved my life, but more than that, you saved my father's spirit. You gave us our voice when we thought we had none." Elena embraced the girl, tears streaming down her face, and for the first time in years, she felt truly at home. Months passed and Copper Ridge continued to transform. The Multilingual Services Office became the heart of the community, a place where different cultures met and understood each other. Elena worked tirelessly, not just translating words, but building bridges between communities that had existed side by side in isolation. She organized community gatherings where people from different backgrounds could share their traditions, their foods, and their stories. The town that had once been divided by language barriers became a model of multicultural cooperation. Andrei's farm flourished with the water rights secured and the compensation, money allowing him to invest in proper irrigation and equipment. He hired workers from various immigrant communities, creating a small cooperative farm that became profitable and sustainable. Katya grew into a confident young woman, bilingual and bright, often helping Elena at the office as a junior translator. The girl who had once been a victim became a symbol of hope and resilience for the entire community. One afternoon, nearly a year after the trial, Elena sat in her office reviewing documents when Sheriff Brennan stopped by with news. "The territorial governor wants to meet with you," he said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "He's heard about what you've done here in Copper Ridge, and he's considering implementing multilingual services across the entire Arizona territory. He wants your advice on how to set it up." Elena felt a swell of pride and possibility. What had started as a desperate translation in a dusty saloon had grown into something far larger than she ever imagined. As the sun set that evening, Elena walked through the streets of Copper Ridge. Hearing the beautiful mixture of languages floating from homes and businesses, she heard Spanish laughter from the cantina, Chinese conversations from the laundry, German songs from the mining camp, and English mixed with Russian from Andrei's farm workers heading home. The cacophony that once would have been dismissed as confusion now sounded like harmony to her ears. Each language was a thread in the rich tapestry of the community, and Elena had helped weave them together. She stopped by the Lucky Strike saloon for old time's sake. Sam was behind the bar, and he poured her a glass of lemonade knowing she didn't drink alcohol. "You changed this town, Elena," he said warmly. "Hell, you changed the whole territory. Who would have thought that a saloon dancer who spoke 9 languages would become the most important person in Arizona?" Elena smiled and looked around the saloon where it had all begun. "I was always more than a saloon dancer, Sam. Just like Andrei was more than a desperate farmer who couldn't speak English. Just like all those witnesses were more than foreigners or criminals, we're all more than what people first see. Sometimes it just takes the right moment and the right words to reveal who we truly are." That night, as Elena returned to her small home at the edge of town, she stood on her porch and looked up at the vast Arizona sky filled with stars. She thought about her journey, from the diplomatic circles of Europe to the dusty frontier of the American West, from a saloon dancer to a voice for justice. She had spent her life collecting languages like treasures, never quite knowing their purpose. But now she understood. Every language she had learned had been preparing her for this moment, for this place, for these people who needed someone who could hear them. The wind carried voices across the desert night, stories in a dozen different tongues, all finding their way into the air above Copper Ridge. And Elena, the woman who understood them all, smiled with deep contentment. She had finally found where she belonged, not in one language or one culture, but in the beautiful space between them all, where understanding begins and barriers fall away. In the Old West, in a small Arizona town, she had proven that the most powerful weapon against injustice wasn't a gun or money or power. It was simply the ability to listen, to understand, and to speak for those who could not speak for themselves. The town of Copper Ridge would never forget the day a desperate Russian farmer walked into a saloon and no one could understand him, until a dancer spoke his language and changed everything. It became a story passed down through generations, a reminder that in a land built by immigrants from every corner of the world, the greatest strength comes not from speaking one language louder, but from learning to understand all the languages spoken around us. And it all started with 9 languages, one brave woman, and the simple human desire to be heard and understood.